AI is going to impact all of us one way or another. We're already seeing companies who are making cutbacks where they can. There are millions of people who talk to AI chatbots as a friend or a therapist or even as a romantic partner, and those numbers are only increasing. DeepMind was actually the first company who set out to build AGI. They were very worried about Google having full control of artificial general intelligence. I think it's going to also affect young people in terms of
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. It's not very often that I invite a guest rather than having guests come to me, but I invited this guest, and it's because I am so excited about both her and her topic. So today we'll be speaking with Parmy Olson, who is a Bloomberg opinion columnist and covering the tech industry for the better part of, I think, almost 15 years. She's a former reporter for the Wall Street Journal and Forbes and the winner of multiple industry awards. And we'll be talking in the main about her book, Supremacy, subtitled AI, ChatGPT, and the Race That Will Change the World, which is in part about the intense competition between two leading artificial intelligence firms, OpenAI and DeepMind. My hope is that you will leave here, as I did when I read the book, with some deeper insights into both the themes of the book, but a more nuanced understanding of some of the complex dynamics that are shaping the AI landscape. Thank you so much, Parmy, for joining us today.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, Karen.
Terrific. So for those who haven't read it yet, and if you're looking to buy a hard copy, this is what it looks like. For those who haven't read it yet, can you just outline sort of the main thesis of the book?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you showed the cover because it is the title is overlaid on a painting, a very famous painting of Napoleon. And we wanted to really, in designing the book cover, I had some fantastic people that I worked with at Macmillan on this, show that this was a story really about people. Yeah. And that's what I set out to do in writing this book. And what inspired me actually was the release of ChatGPT just a little over 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. I was completely in awe of this little text box that appeared on the internet that was powered by a large language model, but that was just so much more fluent and human-like than anything we had experienced before from the likes of Alexa or Siri. And having reported on the AI industry and the field for the previous 6 or 7 years, I knew this had not just come out of nowhere. And what really fascinated me was that this was actually, for the people who had built this, ChatGPT was a step towards something so much grander, which was artificial general intelligence. And this is this idea of AI surpassing the cognitive abilities of humans, essentially becoming smarter and more capable than us as people. And behind the scenes in all this, I saw a kind of battle brewing between, in particular, I focused on two key visionaries, Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, and Demis Hassabis, the founder and CEO of DeepMind, which is essentially the AI lab for Google. And both those men were really the first in a big way to set out to build AGI. And the reason I wanted to write the book was not just to talk about those people, but to bring to light an element of hypocrisy that troubled me a little bit, which is that both these builders had set out with very humanitarian goals that AGI would solve all sorts of human problems, that would bring greater wealth to everyone and solve all sorts of diseases and intractable problems in society. But along the way, both these men had aligned themselves with very, very large technology companies. And those dreams, those utopian goals had kind of faded into the background a little bit. And their sole purpose now was sort of furthering and extending the growth of wealth and influence of these tech companies, essentially Microsoft and Google. So I think this is really kind of a story of Silicon Valley, the typical narrative of mission drift of the founder. But also I thought it was important to point that out to people now that AI is becoming such a big part of our lives, that the people building it had these grand dreams that it could improve our lives exponentially, but they actually really struggled to maintain this path towards that vision. And not only that, they both grappled with oversight. They both knew that AI needed proper checks and balances, and they, for various reasons, which we can go into, failed to put that oversight into place.
Mm. That played out on a large public scale here in the U.S. anyway. Maybe I'm imagining the rest of the world for OpenAI last year with sort of the board revolt, and then subsequently two of the most important players leaving and starting their own companies. I hadn't realized it had played out as well with DeepMind.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe we can pull that thread a little bit, and I'd like to hear both more about sort of the thread you were on, but also, sort of what is the current balance in general between ethical AI development and profit-driven motives?
Well, first of all, there is no balance. There's no balance at all. There's no oversight and there's no regulation. So it really is a little bit of a Wild West right now. And we're trusting the good-natured, incentives of the people running these companies. But when it comes to oversight, and let's just take DeepMind, because you mentioned that hasn't got as much attention, and it's true. What happened with that company is that for several years, the founders of DeepMind, who had sold their company to Google in 2015, after that sale, had tried for several years to break away from Google. This was a secret plan that they worked on with their staff, and they hired lots of very expensive lawyers in London to try and draw up a legal structure by which they could operate under as a separate entity from Google. And the reason they wanted to do this is because they were very worried about Google having full control of artificial general intelligence. DeepMind was actually the first company who set out to build AGI. Demis Hassabis was the first to do that in 2010 when he founded the company. And he really put his neck on the line in the scientific community by doing that, because back then the idea of AGI was very much a fringe theory. It's far more accepted now in computer science and in the field of AI. But, as they grew and they became an incredible vacuum of expertise, lots of talented engineers joined DeepMind, which is what attracted them to Google, which is why Google bought them. They made incredible progress in pushing AI forward. And in fact, before ChatGPT came out and everybody was talking about OpenAI, for a long time, people were talking about DeepMind. It showcased its AI famously in China and South Korea when it developed a AI program that could beat the world's best Go players. Go is this sort of Asian version of chess, which is highly more intricate and complicated. And it was sort of like a similar showcase to when IBM beat Garry Kasparov, and that was like a milestone for AI's development. DeepMind was kind of the company that did that with AI and with Go. And so, this was a company that was getting further ahead than pretty much anybody towards this theoretical threshold of AGI. But unfortunately for Demis Hassabis and his co-founders, their efforts to break away from Google just didn't work out. What they'd been trying to do was spin out into something like a non-governmental organization that would have a board of, like, an ethics board of advisors, or directors rather, who would have legal control over this technology and have proper oversight to make sure that it wasn't misused purely for profit, but also for the benefit of society, and be used for good, essentially. But Google, surprisingly or not surprisingly, given that they paid $650 million for DeepMind, stopped them from spinning out, said that wasn't going to happen. Which was very surprising to the founders, because for years Google had led them on to think that it would actually give them funding to operate independently, but then that never happened. The reason I thought that was very interesting was because we sort of saw a parallel trajectory for OpenAI, which had started off as a nonprofit organization, and had these grand pronouncements about building AI that would broadly benefit humankind. Those were their exact words, without any kind of financial obligations. But that whole idea also didn't pan out, and they ended up needing money to build bigger and better AI to reach AGI. And so they aligned themselves with Microsoft. and took $1 billion in investment, and eventually up as much as 13 billion. And so I think in both cases, we really see examples of kind of ends justify the means thinking by some of these
Mhm.
visionaries. They seem to have very good intentions, but as people say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And,
Yeah.
and particularly when you're building AI, you are, surrounded by these, this bubble of this, well, rather this gravitational pull of large technology companies. In Silicon Valley, these are the largest people in the room, and it's very hard to escape their gravitational pull. And that's exactly what happened to Sam and Demis.
Wow. I mean, it's hard for me to think of an example of something that was good for humanity that didn't also have a shadow side. It's just hard to ring fence these things.
Yeah.
But I accept that Google has a philanthropic arm, and it wasn't the arm that spent the money on DeepMind. So yeah, and this was the core or the nugget maybe of your journalism that led to the book, was the research that you did on the DeepMind situation.
That's right. That's exactly right. So when I was working at the Wall Street Journal from the London bureau, and I've been based in London for a long time, and DeepMind is based in London, I was just doing a lot of reporting on DeepMind. It's an incredibly secretive company. And sometimes the best way to find out what's going on is to try and talk to people. You could try to talk to people who are still there or talk to people who've left. And it was a senior person who had left who told me about this secret project to try and break away. And I just kept digging on that particular line. I think I reached out to something like 80 different people connected to DeepMind, and only something like half a dozen were willing to talk, because it had really been drilled into them not to talk about it. So it was very, very difficult getting that story out, but I got there eventually. And I just thought it was really a really interesting illustration of this grappling over control and a real struggle to do proper oversight. Because I think, as we well know, there's very little proper regulation over technology generally. We're all addicted to our phones and social media. There has been no law passed by Congress to regulate social media or even sort of privacy related regulation. So, these tech companies have been operating in a regulatory vacuum for many years. So it's been up to them to self-regulate. And there have been some real good efforts. I think what Demis tried to do was a genuine attempt to, protect AGI and make sure it wasn't misused. And I think Sam Altman also had good intentions when he started OpenAI with the structure that he did. But it was just almost impossible to maintain those standards over time.
Yeah. Well, given that environment, what are your thoughts? I was going to ask about the existing regulatory, but there is none or very little.
Well, there's some coming down the pipe.
Yeah. What changes do you believe are necessary to ensure responsible, I guess, for lack of a better word, responsible AI advancement?
Well, the good news is we do have regulation coming from the European Union. We have the AI Act. It is extremely broad in scope, and some would say it's too broad. Some say it's too vague. But you know what? I think it's great that we have something. We have some kind of policy trying to address the issue. There are standards bodies who are currently working on trying to specify what the do's and don'ts are for companies that use AI. But really, the main thrust of it is to make sure that AI technology isn't misused. And so the law categorizes AI into it classifies it in various levels of risk. You have high risk, kind of medium risk, and low risk. And at the top, with high risk, you have AI models that are used for surveillance, that are used to emotionally manipulate people. Even some of these general purpose generative AI models, in some cases, are classified as high risk. And so it means that companies have to really just watch how their models are used or misused, and potentially pay penalties if they're not, if they don't have proper guardrails in place.
So as we think about sort of some regulations coming into place, how do you envision the sort of the ongoing AI race impacting society over the next decade? And I think particularly concerning areas like employment, privacy, which you mentioned, and
Yeah.
this concentration of technological power.
Yes. So first of all, I think for us public, regular people, AI is going to impact all of us one way or another in all sorts of different ways. I think we're certainly going to see job displacement. We're
Mhm.
already seeing companies who are making cutbacks where they can in areas like marketing or customer service or sales or writing. I work as a writer, so I see myself as vulnerable in all of this.
Yeah.
And it's early days, but I think, when a company can increase its margins and they don't get too much reputational blowback for doing so, just because they're not hiring more people, they're going to continue to do that. If these models can do work that is seemingly as good as a human. I think that particularly affects young people because the companies that are using generative AI the most, particularly in white collar jobs, are using it to automate entry level positions, the
Mhm.
work that college graduates would take on when they first join a hedge fund or an investment banking firm or a legal firm. So this is things like the role of a junior analyst and writing up
Mhm.
research reports and for a portfolio manager or doing due diligence. That's the kind of thing that AI can do. So when it comes to jobs, I'm most concerned about young people entering the workforce. I think it's going to also affect young people in terms of maybe older people as well in terms of an erosion of human connection. Now that sounds a little bit abstract and fluffy, but there's been a real rise in AI companionship apps,
Mhm.
which I find really intriguing. There are millions of people who talk to AI chatbots as a friend or a therapist or even as a romantic partner, and those numbers are only increasing. And yeah, I mean those are two trends that I'm looking at.
Yeah. Also, just thinking about your research for this book, did your views on the potential benefits and risks evolve when you were doing this research? And if so, how?
Yeah, I think in some ways I kind of view it in the way that I think young people entering the workforce view
Mhm.
AI, in that it's both a friend and a foe. So if you look at a call, and I'm focused on this because I'm writing about it at the moment. I'm interviewing young workers to see how they're using these things, but they talk about how when they send their resumes to different companies, they are using AI to write their resumes and to write their cover letters and to fill out their application forms because they know that the companies are using AI to screen them.
Mm.
And some of
Yeah.
them are doing video interviews with an AI and they're being judged by an AI. There's one girl I spoke to recently, just about to graduate from university. She's like top of her class academically, but she's failed all of these interviews because the video interviews because the AI judges her as having low EQ. And I spoke to a recruiter who had met her and said that's just that she would have flown through a human interview. So it's actually really,
Hmm.
it's hard. It's a huge battle, I think, almost for young people. But at the same time, they're using these tools, whether to apply for jobs or to help them do those first jobs. So I think that's, when you ask me about the cost benefit analysis, I think this is the thing we're all going to grapple with, is
Mhm.
that it affects our livelihoods potentially, but it can also help us be more productive and make things more convenient. The danger, I think, is when we begin to over rely on technology, and technology that just makes our lives more convenient isn't necessarily better for us as humans. And when you think about social media, it certainly makes connecting with people more convenient, but we're not really getting the full benefit of proper socializing with people just by sprinkling a bunch of likes over Instagram and Facebook. We're missing out on a lot of the face-to-face interaction that we used to have 10, 20 years
Sure.
ago. So
In
when I
this,
speak to you, yeah, sorry, go ahead,
yeah,
Karen.
I didn't just say in the same vein as when I use the map apps when I navigate. There's
Yes.
research now that says it's so much better for your brain to actually not use the map app all the time,
Oh,
but
really?
to think about where you're going, right? Because that
Yeah.
uses your brain differently than just turn right, turn left, go straight for 14 miles or whatever you're being told to do. So
But
I
that's
think
so
it's that
interesting.
same sort of thing. Yeah.
But that's so interesting to make a value judgment about that,
Hmm.
because there are people in Silicon Valley or just generally who would say, actually, outsourcing that part of my brain to Google
Hmm.
Maps or Waze is good, is a net good for me because it's freeing up my brain to think about other things. But I do wonder if that's just, a common wisdom that maybe we need to question a little bit, because I hear this from companies who are, for example, I spoke to a hedge fund who said they're using AI to do the work that their junior analysts do. So their junior analysts don't have to like read all the market reports and the Moody's reports and the company accounts. The AI does it all for them, and then it frees them up to do higher level work. But I don't know if it's correct to categorize all of
Right.
that as low level work, because that's actually training your brain to
Exactly.
be the next senior analyst.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you be a great senior analyst if you don't appreciate on some level the work of the junior analyst, which is now outsourced? Yeah. The whole
Yeah.
thing about the brain was, I mean, I am 100% for outsourcing things. We all have more to do than we have time to do. But it
Hmm.
was does your brain sort of lose some capacity, or does it sharpen some capacity to do that
Mm.
task rather than outsourcing it? But I think,
Hmm.
we're clearly at an inflection point right now. And it is,
Yeah.
I think, during this transition that those are the kinds of questions that we'll learn, right? We don't
Mm.
know yet. And so I think they're
Yeah.
exactly the kinds of questions to
It's
ask.
it's kind of a philosophical question in a way, because it's like ultimately what we're doing is just paying a price for that convenience. And the question is, whether it's like developing that particular part of our brains. And the
Mhm.
question is just, are we okay with paying that price? Maybe that's an okay price to pay, and maybe it's not.
Yeah, exactly. Which makes me think about decision making. So, executive decision making in particular is something I'm interested in because it's these 49-51 decisions that CEOs mostly
Hmm.
face. If they were easy,
Yeah.
somebody else would have made them.
Yeah.
And that, and they need to be data informed. But when you get to these 49-51 decisions, it's often not data that makes the decision because the
Hmm.
data is not clear. And I'm,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have thoughts about what the role of AI would be in executive decision making for those tough decisions.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that generative AI models are trained on text on the internet. That's
Mm-hmm.
all. And so they come across as being incredibly smart and having a huge, deep well of knowledge. But what they really lack is experience. They haven't experienced, talking to the rank and file of a particular business, or understanding the ins and outs of a particular product line or supply chain. So
Yeah.
they're just extremely good at mimicry. So CEOs can absolutely try and augment their decision making by using these things, or any
Mm-hmm.
kind of business leader can. But I feel like that's potentially a little bit of a trap that you can fall into, particularly if you over rely on it, in the same way that people might over rely on consultants, which are often
Yes.
overpriced. But there has to be a real balance, as you were bringing up before, a balance between, just using surface level knowledge gleaned off the internet by a large language model, and your own experience of just talking to people and understanding the ins and outs of your business to make those key decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that being conscious about how we use AI, right, when it's appropriate and when it's not, or
Hmm.
when it's appropriate to use this as an adjunct, but just because it's easy doesn't mean it's right. I guess I'll say is sort of the
Exactly.
summary there. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's it exactly.
Great. So you mentioned this a little bit in terms of your work on the original DeepMind Google story, but I'm curious, what challenges did you encounter while investigating and writing about these really high profile tech figures and companies? And if you have any advice for journalists in particular who are covering the tech industry today.
Oh, I wish I could have dug more up. I always feel like if I had more time, or if I spoke to more people, I would find out more. I would get more stories. I mean, I think I got the main nuggets of
Yeah.
the key narrative. And of course, my opinion is in there about what I find right and what I find wrong about what happened with this AI battle. But my way of reporting and connecting with people, A lot of times it's cold calling, going on
Mhm.
LinkedIn and just reaching out to people on LinkedIn, direct message, finding out emails. I go to a lot of events and I talk to people at events, and a lot of times you just need an introduction from someone else, particularly with AI companies. You get a lot of startups who are
Mhm.
founded by people that might have worked at some of these core Silicon Valley companies like Microsoft or Google. So it's just a matter of sort of doggedly pursuing people, stripping yourself of all dignity and self-respect, and just continuously reaching out to people and knocking on the door. Sometimes it really can be annoying for those people, so you have to know when to stop. But yeah, I guess
Yeah.
that would be,
Yeah.
yeah, my,
What
you have to be
when I grow
strategic.
up,
You don't, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Karen.
when I grow up, I want to cold call for a living. Said no one ever. So yeah, congrats to you
So no one
for
ever said that. Yeah.
right. Great. Well, last question for you. Are there any sort of surprising or less known anecdotes about Sam Altman or Denise that didn't make it into the book that are worthy of being shared?
Well, one of the things I found out was that Google had made this very specific promise to
Mm,
OpenAI. Sorry. Google had made this very specific promise to DeepMind that they could spin out, that they could get this, that they could operate as a separate entity. And from my reporting, I found out that they had promised $10 billion as an endowment. Oh, I'm sorry, $15 billion as an endowment over 10 years, which is a huge amount of money just to prop up a company that they didn't even own anymore. And it sounds, you could say it's incredibly naive of the DeepMind founders to believe that they could break away from Google. But my understanding from the people I spoke to was that Google had signed a term sheet, that top
mm,
executives at the company had signed a term sheet promising to do this. And the reason I say this in answer to your question is I wish I had just, if I'd had more time, I might have been able to get a copy of that term sheet and just reported a little
mm,
bit more on that. But I think it really speaks to, again, the kind of how difficult it is to trust tech companies these days, to the extent that their own executives and the people working inside them can't trust what people at the top are saying. Google was really dangling the carrot, I think, in a lot of respects for these DeepMind founders, and in the end, didn't give them the independence that they sought.
mm. Well, Parmy, thank you so much. I just want to remind people we're talking with Parmy Olson. This is her book with the amazing cover featuring Napoleon because it's about people. Supremacy, AI, ChatGPT, and the race that will change the world, which won this year's Business Book of the Year 2024 from Financial Times and Schroders. Also, just a note that I interviewed last year's winner, Amy Edmondson, and I put a link to that in the comments below. Parmy, thank you again, and best
Oh,
of
thank
luck
you for
in all
having
your
me.
future reporting. We'll look for more goodness. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.